I am still that little kid that grew up in Liverpool. Okay, I got really famous, but in here, I'm still that little kid. So I'm amazed at like the audience reaction and stuff. And
picture this. Paul McCartney, now a legend with silver hair and soft eyes that have seen the rise and fall of entire generations, sits in his garden surrounded by silence. The same hands that once shaped melodies that defined humanity now rest quietly on his guitar. The Beatles changed everything. They turned teenage dreams into history. They invented fame as we know it. But on this quiet afternoon, Paul does something that catches even his closest friends by surprise. He looks back at the chaos, the miracles, the memories, and admits that 3 bands in his heart stand above even the Beatles. Not because the Beatles were lesser, but because these bands reached beyond even what they imagined possible. The first to come to his mind is the Rolling Stones. They were the mirror in which the Beatles saw their reflection, only darker, sharper, more dangerous. The Stones were everything the Beatles couldn't be: wild, seductive, unapologetically reckless. Their music didn't invite you in, it dared you to follow. Paul remembers the rivalry that both divided and fueled them, the endless headlines, the fans who picked sides, the press that called it war. But deep down, it wasn't hate, it was hunger. The Beatles sought harmony, the Stones craved chaos. One wrote anthems of unity, the other hymns to temptation. While the Beatles sang about love, the Stones sang about sin. Paul could never forget the first time he saw Jagger on stage, bare chest, glistening under red light, every movement somewhere between a dance and a threat. Keith Richards stood beside him, guitar snarling like an unchained beast. They didn't just perform, they provoked. They made rebellion look holy. The tabloids called them villains. Paul saw prophets. The Stones dragged rock from the heavens down into the dirt and made it divine. Every time McCartney watched them live, he felt something twist inside him, an uneasy cocktail of admiration and jealousy. They weren't chasing melody, they were chasing danger. They weren't sculpting beauty, they were summoning truth, even when it hurt. In their imperfection, Paul found perfection of another kind. They were the storm to his sunshine, the fire to his melody. Together, they defined an era. When the sound of that danger finally fades, when the echoes of rebellion drift into silence, McCartney's thoughts soften, drifting toward something colder and grander: Pink Floyd. He remembers the first time he heard The Dark Side of the Moon, the precision, the patience, the depth. It wasn't rock, it was architecture made of emotion. Floyd painted music on a cosmic canvas, where every note felt like a planet in orbit. Paul was stunned by their restraint, by how they could make silence sound louder than chaos. They didn't perform, they hypnotized. Their work was introspection turned into symphony. He admired how they never sought fame, only truth.
I know, but I mean, I was a fan of lots of people, so I kind of get it. I'm also very happy.
McCartney would sometimes sit alone in Abbey Road after hours, lights dimmed, playing Us and Them or Wish You Were Here through massive studio monitors. The room would fill with a strange stillness, like time itself was listening. The music felt alive, breathing through every wall. He imagined the band in their own strange orbit. Waters building universes from sorrow, Gilmour turning heartbreak into beauty, Wright and Mason weaving the invisible glue that held infinity together. He often thought of them as the mirror image of the Beatles. Where his band had painted light, Floyd explored shadow. And yet, both searched for the same thing: truth beyond fame, meaning beyond melody. McCartney admired that they never rushed, that they trusted space and silence more than any pop hook ever could. He often thought Pink Floyd carried the torch the Beatles once lit, the courage to explore, to experiment, to lose themselves completely in the art. And in their sound, he felt something the Beatles had once chased but never fully reached: infinity itself, vast and unknowable, echoing forever through time. But even Pink Floyd's cosmic reach bows before one final force in Paul's heart: the unstoppable storm known as Led Zeppelin. When Zeppelin came crashing into the world, Paul knew the game had changed forever. They didn't make songs. They made earthquakes. Page's guitar roared like fire. Plant's voice was thunder. Bonham's drums were the heartbeat of a wild god, and Jones stitched it all together like a mad scientist. Zeppelin took blues, mythology, sex, and power, and melted them into pure elemental energy. McCartney couldn't deny it. They embodied freedom in its rawest form. They broke rules so violently that the world had no choice but to follow. Where the Beatles invited you to dream, Zeppelin forced you to surrender. Paul respected that. He saw in them the spirit of rebellion that defined everything rock was supposed to be. Sometimes, late at night, he would listen to their live albums, How the West Was Won, The Song Remains the Same, and marvel at their power. It wasn't just musicianship, it was possession. They turned concert halls into cathedrals of electricity. There was danger in their sound, and Paul admired that, because it reminded him of the unchained spirit that had first drawn him to rock and roll as a boy in Liverpool. He also saw the cost, the pressure, the drugs, the exhaustion, the mythology that burned too bright. Zeppelin were mortals pretending to be gods, and for a while they convinced everyone, including themselves. When Bonham died, Paul felt it like a personal wound. Another chapter of the rock odyssey had closed. And yet, as the sun set over his memories, McCartney smiled quietly to himself. He didn't feel regret. He felt awe, pride that his band opened the doors for these giants to walk through. The Beatles built the stage. The Stones, Pink Floyd, and Zeppelin turned it into a kingdom of thunder and dreams. And yet, as his memories drift deeper, two other names echo through his thoughts, bands that shaped him long before the world called him a Beatle. The first shimmer of that memory comes from across the ocean, the Beach Boys. The memory of that first listen to Pet Sounds feels like opening a secret doorway. He was sitting in the studio, surrounded by the soft glow of equipment lights, when the needle dropped on the vinyl. The room fell silent. Those harmonies, so pure they almost hurt, rolled over him like a tide. Every chord felt alive, trembling with honesty. He could sense Brian Wilson's obsession in every detail, every modulation, every whisper of the strings. It wasn't about success. It was about perfection, emotion, transcendence. Paul remembers how it changed him. Until then, pop had rules: verse, chorus, verse, but Pet Sounds erased them. The Beach Boys had turned heartache into architecture. It wasn't just music, it was a confession dressed in sunshine. McCartney once said that listening to that album was like watching someone paint the air with feeling. It made him realize that pop could stand next to classical, that simplicity could hide divine complexity. He later walked into Abbey Road with that record still echoing in his head, and from it, Sgt. Pepper was born, not as imitation, but as conversation, a transatlantic dialogue between dreamers. To Paul, the Beach Boys weren't rivals, they were teachers, poets of sound who had shown him that beauty was the only goal worth chasing. And then his thoughts travel closer to home, to a band that carried the spirit of rebellion through the next decade, The Who. They were raw, loud, theatrical, and fearless. Pete Townshend didn't just play guitar, he attacked it, each windmill strike a declaration of war against conformity. Roger Daltrey's voice roared like a storm that refused to quiet down, while Keith Moon's drumming turned rhythm into chaos, beautiful and terrifying at once. The Who weren't musicians on stage, they were revolutionaries in motion. Every shattered guitar, every screamed lyric was a protest against boredom, silence, control. McCartney remembers standing backstage once, watching Townshend lift his arm high before the final crash. For a moment, time froze. The explosion of sound felt like a rebellion against mortality itself. They made destruction feel sacred, noise feel necessary. But there was something more beneath the carnage. The Who gave purpose to rage. They showed that anger could be truth, that pain could be art, and that chaos, when sculpted with sincerity, could move mountains. Gilmour thought of them as the last bridge between the innocence of the 60s and the fractured brilliance of what came next. When Paul thinks of the Beach Boys and The Who, he realizes how deeply they're woven into the same tapestry of history that the Beatles helped to create. These were the friends, the rivals, the dreamers, the ones who kept rock alive when the light of the 60s began to fade. They proved that music was never meant to stand still, it was meant to evolve, to explode, to question everything. He leans back in his chair, the evening breeze brushing through the leaves. In that moment, he understands that greatness isn't about being first, it's about being eternal. The Beatles gave birth to an age, but these bands, the wild, the brave, the unbroken, made sure it never died. Chaucer, as twilight deepens, McCartney watches the last glimmers of daylight slip through the trees, their branches swaying gently like the rhythm of a song he once wrote but can't quite remember. The garden hums with the low murmur of life, the same hum that has always existed between silences, even before his first chord was ever struck. He hears ghosts of old harmonies in the rustle of leaves, notes that once shook the world, now whispering softly to no one in particular. Fame, rivalry, love, loss, all of it feels like a storm long past, leaving behind only calm seas and a golden horizon. He thinks of John, of George, of all the laughter and chaos and genius that filled those studio nights. He thinks of the faces in the crowd, millions of strangers who somehow shared one heartbeat with him every time he sang. The weight of it once felt impossible. Now it feels like a gift he's finally learned how to carry. McCartney smiles faintly. Maybe the Beatles were never meant to be the final verse of the story, just the chorus that will keep returning forever. Because every time someone picks up a guitar, writes a melody, or finds hope in a song, they are continuing what began all those years ago in a smoky Liverpool basement. The sky darkens into deep blue, the air cools, and a single star appears overhead. He looks up and nods quietly, as if answering an unspoken question. The music outlives the men who make it. The chords never fade, they just change hands. And as the last note of evening falls, Paul McCartney closes his eyes. He can almost hear the world breathing in time with him, a quiet rhythm that says the truth he's always known: music never dies, it only finds new hearts to live in.